Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight on Tackling Life with James Cary. We'll get started in just a few minutes, but I thought I'd just welcome you first. This is the latest in our Tackling Life series of interviews. We've done a few of these over the last year or so in lockdown, and tonight we're interviewing James Cary, who is a comedy writer for various BBC TV and radio shows, and he also helps to advise up and coming scriptwriters who are in the industry. He's also a Christian, so we're going to be chatting to him about what it's like to be a comedy writer and a Christian in the comedy world. We also, as well as me asking James some questions, we're going to give you the chance to ask James your questions. You can do that by going to an address that's just coming up at the bottom of the screen, going to pigeonhole.at/comedy. That's pigeonhole.at/comedy. And there you can type in any questions you have for James. Maybe something we chat about will spark a question in your mind. You can just post it there, and we'll leave lots of time to ask him your questions. Also at Pigeonhole is just a little bit of fun, a poll for you to tell us what's your favorite style of comedy, your favorite comedy format, and maybe we'll chat about the results of that at some point in the interview. Well, if you've just joined, then welcome tonight to Tackling Life with James Cary. My name's Michelson, I should say. I work for a church in Cambridge called Christ Church, and this is the latest in a series of Tackling Life interviews we've been doing over lockdown for the last year or so. Tonight we're interviewing James Cary, who is a comedy writer. He's written various TV and radio shows for the BBC, and he advises up-and-coming scriptwriters who are getting into the game. And he's also a Christian. So we're going to be interviewing him and asking, what's it like being a Christian in the industry? How does your faith intersect with your work as a comedy writer? And as a comedy writer, what do you make of things like the Bible and Christian culture around comedy? I'm not the only one who's going to be asking James questions. You can ask him your questions at an address. It's just coming up on the banner at the bottom of the screen. There it goes. Head over to pigeonhole.at/comedy. That's pigeonhole.at/comedy. And there you can post any questions you have for James. We'll try to leave a decent amount of time to ask those. And you can also fill out a fun poll that we have there. What's your favorite comedy format? Give that a go, and maybe we'll chat about the results partway through. So again, welcome if you joined us for Tackling Life tonight. It's great to have you with us. Hope you'll enjoy the next hour or so. We'll finish up at about 8:30, but welcome. It's great to have you with us, and I'm looking forward to our time together. Well, I wonder, James, are you there?
I am there. How you doing?
Hello, James. I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Yeah, great to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. Great to have you with us. Thanks for joining. James, we're going to be chatting a bit about jokes, I guess. And I've actually been the butt of several jokes over the last few weeks to do with this interview. I think the implication has been that this is bound to descend into some kind of farce. And to be fair, that may be what happens. But just to give us an idea of the rough plan, I'm just going to chat with you about your work as a comedy writer, your thoughts around comedy, Christianity, the Bible.
Yeah.
There's a place where people can ask you their questions at pigeonhole.at/comedy and fill out a fun poll. So that's a rough idea. Yeah, how does that sound?
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's get started. James, just tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm 45. I don't know why I'm starting with that, but I just feel I should say that out loud. I don't know why. I live in Somerset. I'm from Somerset. I was born in Frome, which was a slightly failing market town at the time, and is now a wannabe bohemian kind of mecca for extremely expensive coffee and hipsters. But now I live in Yeovil in Somerset, and I lived for 15 years in London after university, where I was at Durham. I failed to get into Cambridge, not just once, but twice. I wanted to go to Cambridge to do the Cambridge Footlights and write comedy and be funny, like all of the people I used to watch on TV. So I didn't get in, went to Durham, did theology, and then moved to London after that, and sort of made a living as a writer, got married, started having kids, and moved out to the West Country where I'm from. So yeah, that's the 60-second version. That's all you need to know, frankly.
Thanks for that. So James, we've got your location history. What do you do? What do you do these days?
Oh, well, that's a good question. Yes. So I write sitcoms, I read scripts, I make podcasts. But yeah, so I started out writing sketches at university, doing stuff for the Review, moved to London and wrote some radio stuff, radio sketches, and then had a good Edinburgh Festival, got a sitcom on Radio 4 called Think the Unthinkable. Oh. And that did okay. That ran for a few series. And from that, I got a mentor through that, got me onto writing a show called My Hero on BBC One, which was the sitcom with Ardlo Hanlon in it. So I did 6 episodes of that over the course of 3 years. And I did also an episode of My Family as well. My claim to fame on My Family is it was the lowest rated episode they ever did, by which I mean they had the smallest audience they'd had up until that point, because it was on the same night as the last ever episode of Friends, which was on Channel 4. So there was a big to-do about that. So anyway, I don't take it personally.
I wouldn't.
But my episode had Peter Capaldi in it, who went on to become Doctor Who, and Malcolm Tucker in the thick of it and stuff. So
I assume he was less sweary in My Family.
He was considerably less sweary. Yes, that's right. He wasn't comically, inventively sweary. So I did that, and then went back to radio, did a show called Hut 33 about code breakers in Bletchley Park during World War II. And through that, ended up working on Miranda's radio show, which then became a TV show. And I worked on that for a couple of series, and then I came up with my own sitcom for TV with a guy I wrote with on Miranda called Bluestone 4-2 about bomb disposal in Afghanistan, which has obviously an interesting subject for a comedy. And so that ran for 3 years, 3 seasons of that on BBC Three. And then since then I've co-written a couple of episodes of Citizen Khan, which is a BBC One show, and that whole time I've been writing Milton Jones's radio show with him. So I've written about 50 episodes of radio with Milton. Wow. And also I work for the BBC Writers' Room, reading scripts and mentoring people. And so yeah, that's what I've been doing for the getting on for 20 years, which is kind of a scary thought.
Yeah, well, it's quite a list of things. Of those things, James, do you have like a favorite project or a proudest moment apart from My Family's lowest rated episode?
Yeah. The 2 things I'm most proud of, I think there's an episode of so the series 3 of Bluestone 4-2. We ended series 2 on a cliffhanger. Series 3 is what they call in sitcom land a bottle episode. So usually in a series, quite often there'll be an episode where everyone's just sort of trapped. So they're stuck in a lift for half an hour, and or overnight or whatever, and the actors don't move from that thing. And there's a famous episode of Porridge where they're just locked in all night, and it's just the 2 of them talking. And so we had one of those, and except it's an episode where they are under attack from the Taliban, and they're trying to sort of fight their way out, and they actually think they're going to die because they think they're outgunned and they're in real trouble. So I really enjoyed writing that episode, which is a mixture of kind of action, excitement, adventure, comedy. So that was good. And then I'm proud of that episode. I tend not to go back to things I've done before. So like loads of radio shows and episodes I've done, I was there in the audience when it was recorded. I've not heard it since. I didn't listen to it go out on the radio. I don't tape it. I don't record it. I don't listen back to it. Just because I can normally hear the bits that I got wrong, that didn't work. But the only other thing I wrote that sticks out, I wrote a play called The God Particle about science and religion, which I think might have come to your church actually a few years ago. And I'm really proud of that play. Actually, I really like it. I've sat through it many times. I've directed it. I've done sound effects for it, and I've sat and watched it dozens and dozens of times. And yeah, I'm quite pleased with that. And it's about it's about science and religion. It's about a vicar and a quantum physicist who is a skeptic, and they are literally handcuffed together, and they're going to kind of have to sort it out between themselves. So that you can get that online now. You can find it streaming. You can get it via Vimeo and stuff. So if you look that up, you can find it. But yeah, that's kind of a thing that I'm really pleased with. So kind of really big at different ends of the spectrum there. Shot in South Africa, Afghanistan, soldiers, fighting, shouting, swearing, and then this other kind of slightly more nuanced piece about science and faith. But yeah, so it's great fun. All the different challenges of being a writer. I can't complain, really.
Yeah, it's quite a mix. I'll have to look at both those things. They sound great. But James, you're not only a writer, a comedy writer, you're also a Christian. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, well, what's that like? How do you fit those two things together? Are they in tension? Do they complement each other? What's it like?
Well, I've been sort of piecing them together and trying to fit them together for quite a while. And actually, I've now really, really excited about the overlap, and in a way that I kind of wasn't before. So I became a Christian, just headline story. I became a Christian through school. My parents took me to church a bit, and they go to church a bit themselves. They would call themselves Christians. I became a Christian around about age 11 or 12 at school, when I kind of saw that the Christian faith was sort of objectively true, and that Jesus is the Son of God, and that would require a submission to him and a surrender to him, giving my life to him. And I don't actually remember doing that, but I do remember thinking that this is something I needed to do, or I could just go through my life pretending like it wasn't true, but it is obviously true. So that was my slightly underwhelming conversion experience, which I can't name or date or anything. And I've been sort of figuring out the faith through that. And obviously you get lots of big questions. I studied theology at university. I remember reading, in the 90s, all this skeptical literature about, which then became the Da Vinci Code and all that kind of stuff. Did Jesus have a son? And has the Vatican hushed up documents and all that kind of stuff? And I thought, if there's any academic integrity to that stuff, it will probably come up at university in my theology degree. And you know what? It didn't, because it's nonsense. So my faith was strengthened through that. So my Christian faith has grown. I haven't had any real long dark nights of the soul on that score, but it's always been a bit of a strange one, being a creative comedy person as well, because, and this is what I wrote in the book, the Sacred Art of Joking. It is slightly about how jokes work, how they go wrong, especially in the realm of religion. And I don't think Christians have a particularly good track record on art in the last few hundred years, particularly evangelical ones, which is what I am. We tend to be a bit worried about making pictures of things, and a bit worried about statues, and we're a bit worried about how Roman Catholicism looked in 1520, and we're still worried about that. So it's 500 years later. So it feels like we've not really produced an awful lot of inspiring art and fiction beyond the obvious C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and that sort of stuff. Tolkien was a Roman Catholic, of course. C.S. Lewis wasn't an evangelical. G.K. Chesterton, another great man of faith, Anglican, who eventually went to Roman Catholicism. So in a way, I feel like I've been trying to piece things together from an evangelical perspective. But there's lots of writing in this area, like Francis Schaeffer. I read a book called Angels in the Architecture, which is really helpful for me. And actually, since then, the more I've dug into scripture, the more I've been convinced that actually reading the Bible and realizing that it is also a script. The Bible was to be read aloud and to be heard. Most people throughout human history have heard the Bible rather than read it, because historically people couldn't read. And we've somehow managed to take this amazing tapestry of stories and strange moments and wonderful, delightful moments and transcendent moments and awful, atrocious moments, and we've managed to make it boring. I don't know how we did that, but we've done it. And I think it's because when you go into a church, you're not expecting to laugh particularly. The architecture, the way it's all laid out, it's not a low ceiling comedy club, and nor should it be, you know. But I'm just saying, if church is always serious, it just makes it seem like that anything that's funny is an outlier, possibly naughty. And sometimes you read stuff in scripture and you think that seems funny, but I guess it can't be. And actually, that's just, you know, I want to challenge that and think, no, I think it is funny. In fact, we were talking beforehand, before we saw about a passage of the Bible that you read, you thought was funny. And I mentioned it in my book. Which one was that?
That was the end of Luke's gospel, where Jesus has, you know, Luke tells us Jesus has come back from the dead, and his disciples aren't sure if he's a ghost or if he's real, and he eats some fish in front of him, and it's just so comical, isn't it?
Yeah,
like, how bizarre.
Yeah, and I mean, because they don't know he's coming back, and so they are surprised, and they're looking, just thinking, is he a ghost? And they're thinking, is this fish going to kind of get chewed and then sort of fall on the floor? You know, what's going to happen now? But obviously they don't want to stare at him, but they kind of are staring at him. And it is a funny moment. And in this book I wrote called The Sacred Art of Joking, it's just a bit like that. There's a moment in Terry Pratchett's book, Maud, where they have a character of Death, and Death takes on an apprentice. And there's this moment where there's this sort of transcendent moment where he looks across all the planes of humanity and existence, and then turns to his apprentice and says, do you know what? I could murder a curry. And it's meant to be funny. And that when Jesus says, have you got anything to eat? And they give him some fish, it's the same kind of moment. But if you're assuming that it can't possibly be funny, and if you've found it funny, then you've probably either got it wrong, or worse, you've sinned. Then I think that's a disaster. I think God's word is delightful to read, and strange, and full of moments. I'm looking at Acts at the moment. Just I'm doing a talk next weekend about Pentecost, and it's kind of funny that when the Holy Spirit arrives, the immediate reaction of the onlookers is, I think they've had too much wine. They've had too much new wine. And you get that in comedy, in movies, don't you? When there's a funny thing, and when a weird thing happens in a movie, when an alien spacecraft lands in a park, you usually get the security guard sort of just check the bottom of their cup. You know, what have I been drinking? You know, that's a standard thing. And you've just got dozens of moments like that in the Gospels and in Acts. And it's doubly funny as well in a way, because when they say they've had new wine, and they're drunk on new wine, they kind of are. Yeah,
there's an irony to it, isn't there?
Yeah, it is new wine. It's a new thing. It's a new age. And so the funny thing is, we look at scripture and we think, that's probably not significant, or it's probably nothing. And I don't know if you're a Line of Duty fan, but
I've never checked it out. It's on my list.
Well, it's just sort of come to a head, and my wife was particularly interested in it and has been listening to podcasts about it. And there's a podcast where they go through every single scene, looking for any kind of clue about what's being seeded, who is H, what's going on, what does that mean? There's a reference back to something else, and they're pouring through it. You know, just it's you know, it's just a TV show written pretty fast by a guy called Jed Mercurio, and it kind of hangs together okay, I suppose. And we submit it to this sort of intense level of scrutiny. But with the Bible, it's just like, you know, what is that weird detail? Oh, I don't know. It's probably nothing. It's like, no, it's not nothing. You know, this has been written by God. It's probably something.
Yeah, James, you mentioned your book, The Sacred Art of Joking. It's a great read.
Thank you for holding it up. I appreciate it.
I'd highly recommend it. It's really fantastic. And you mentioned a couple of things there that I'd love to ask you more about. Incidentally, those watching at home, do be on pigeonhole.at/comedy asking James your questions. But James, you mentioned there are a couple of things from the book. You mentioned kind of how easily a joke can go wrong, and the fact that it's almost a miracle that jokes ever go right. And the other thing you mentioned, Well, I guess the big thing was that the Bible is just much funnier than we often think. And I'd love to ask you, well, why don't we notice it in that case? Like, why is it that we tend to put, Christianity over here and comedy and laughter over here, and there's a kind of barbed wire fence between them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think one of the reasons is we don't read it aloud very well. So it's hard to read well, and we have a real tradition of bringing Shakespeare to life, and that's in 17th century language, and we tend not to update the language. But an actor and a group of actors, they rehearse, and they completely the language is strange for a minute or two, but once you start watching a Shakespeare, especially a comedy, and it just starts fizzing and buzzing along, you're totally in the moment, and you do actually laugh at all the jokes, not just to show other people that you found it funny and that you understood it, but you actually find it genuinely funny. So we don't really have that tradition anymore of really working at the text with actors, with performers, and to perform it well. And even though there are kind of movies about Jesus, and they reenact the Gospels and stuff, they're always very serious. Jesus always has that kind of 1,000-yard stare, the reason for that is because people just don't want to risk a joke that could go wrong. People might be offended, and I think that's one of the big things about the book, is that people are worried about causing offense because there's this untrue view that if you've caused someone offense, you have committed a sin. And if you tell me a joke and I'm offended by it, then you should be sorry, because you shouldn't have told that joke. That's actually not true. It's possible in that situation that was unwise, that was tactless, that was inappropriate. Okay, that's fine. But actually, offense is a really bad yardstick for measuring whether the joke should have been told or not. And the reason I know that is because Jesus offended people. So if Jesus was without sin, therefore anything he said or did is therefore a yardstick for what can or cannot be said. We're not Jesus. We don't get to talk in exactly the same way and do the same things. I get it. We don't descend to heaven, in that way. But I take it, I mean, he called people names. He said he called the temple priests and the Pharisees the whitewashed tombs. He called them vipers. I mean, that's proper abuse. That's proper satirical name calling. And people would have been offended by that. And they were offended by that, and they killed him. He knew they would do that. So I think it's one of those things where there's just always this kind of concern that, if someone feels offended, they now own the room, and everyone has to fall over themselves to make them feel better, to apologize. And so therefore, within a church context, people just don't want to have that. They don't want to defend jokes. I mean, life's already too busy. The gospel's already offensive enough, but to defend jokes on top of that is just a bridge too far. So it's just easier to not have comedy, to not risk a joke. And I understand that. I just think it's a shame. And I think it's unbiblical, because I think Jesus gives us a model that what he says is challenging. And sometimes people aren't offended when they should be as well. So we are, if you told a joke that was actually wrong for you to tell and no one was offended, then shame on the people who weren't offended. They should have been. And sometimes you watch old comedy from previous eras, and it's toe curling, and you just think, I can't believe that people thought this was okay, and it really wasn't. This is really sexist. This is really misogynistic, unpleasant objectifying of women, for example. So if you go back to stuff, even actually in the 90s, there's some stuff like that. You go back to old episodes of men behaving badly or whatever, and you just think, oh wow, this got a peak of about 18 million viewers in its last ever episode in the 90s. This was a big show. We weren't offended, and maybe we should have been. So that's why offense is this really fickle, unhelpful way of measuring these things. It may be that people watching us now and are slightly glazing over. I have to think about this stuff a lot because it's my job and I'm a Christian as well. but it's also really immediate, because you can now be criminalized for a joke that people don't like. You only need to cause a perception of offense, and the police can come and arrest you, and you can be found guilty, and you can be heavily fined. So, you know, we don't actually have free speech. And so and the barriers to prosecution are so low that it's almost a joke. So that's why I think it should really affect all of us, and we should give this a bit more thought, I think.
Well, people might want to ask questions around offense and comedy. James, that makes me wonder. So if for example, an offensive joke, or a joke that causes offense, is defensible, why would that be? What's the point of a joke? What's it meant to do?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean,
what's comedy based on?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think, what even is comedy? How does it work? I mean, I can tell you, I mean, I know I've written a book about comedy. Books about comedy, as a rule, are the least funny books you can possibly buy. And they're often written by German or Danish philosophers, which makes them even more impenetrable. And I think that the theory that I'm most happy with is actually, you know, comedy is putting two things together that don't quite belong. In fact, that is art, really. Art is saying, Ellis Potter gave this definition of art. In art, you're saying this is like that. You're connecting two things that you wouldn't naturally connect. You're showing a kind of a connection. And if the art works, you just go, huh, yes, that is interesting. There is something there. There is a connection there. And if art doesn't work, you look at it and just go, no idea. But I don't know what that is. I don't get the joke in the joke terminology, because you can't process the information to understand the joke.
Yeah.
And so in a way, stuff is so whether you want stuff to be comic or not, that in a way that's slightly a secondary issue, because some things are inherently comic. So God becoming man is comic, and it's so comic it's almost ridiculous. And it's so ridiculous that Islam rules out Christianity almost on that basis alone. The idea that God become a man is to them so ridiculous it's funny, and makes Christianity a terrible joke.
And it does seem kind of absurd, doesn't it, at face value? Yeah.
And so you've got this person of unspeakable power who has, like Shakespeare, has like walked into his own play, and he has complete control. In a way, how is that not funny? I mean, superhero movies, I mean, that's what a superhero is, isn't it? They're somebody with much more power than the people around them. It's kind of hard. I mean, we've managed to make superheroes boring now, I think, in terms of they're important and significant, but they're not much fun, I don't think. I mean, I haven't really watched a superhero movie since Spider-Man 2 came out in 2004. I remember thinking, I proposed to my wife the night Superman 1 came out with Tobey Maguire, that one.
Yeah. That was the first 12 I ever saw in the cinema. Okay,
well, now I feel old. I mean, how old were you at the time? It was the first 12 I saw at the cinema. I was 17, but no. So I remember. So I proposed to her, and we had tickets to go, so we went. And so that was the movie we watched that night. And I think we watched the sequel the next year. And I remember thinking thereafter, I don't think I need to see any more superhero films. I hope they don't keep making them. Well, since then, about $15 trillion have been spent making superhero movies that I haven't seen. But in a way, they all work the same way, which is you have someone usually with a gift or a power, and it's often very funny. And they used to be funny. So in Superman, there's that great moment, the original Superman movie from the 70s, when he catches Lois Lane, who's falling from the building, and he says, "It's okay, I've got you." And she says to him, "You've got me. Who's got you?" And so it's a funny moment, because it's funny, because he can fly, and he's sort of bulletproof and everything. So there's a kind of a joy. There's a joy to that, and Jesus has that, which is why the Gospels, I think, are funny. because it's like when Jesus ascends into heaven, they weren't expecting him to do that. And to see someone literally ascend into heaven, I mean, that's kind of funny. It's kind of weird as well. But they weren't standing there nodding to each other going, oh, yes, he's ascending into heaven now. Yes, in accordance with the scriptures. What they're more likely to be doing is he's just told us that we have to go and make disciples of all nations, and he's gone. What, you know what I mean? It's like, thanks. What do we do now? Yeah. You know, and they're standing there. It's almost funny the way there are two men in white, two angels, just saying, "What are you looking at?" You know, he's not coming back anytime soon. Which I always think that's a bit tough on them. Actually, they're just, you know, I think they can be given a minute or two just to go, my goodness, he's ascended into heaven.
Yeah, I think one little observation in your book I really enjoyed on that was, you know, according to the Gospels anyway, people looking at Jesus and saying, look, here's a guy who has power over death. Let's kill him.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really strike you at first, but you look at it, and when Lazarus is raised from the dead, people who were there witnessed it. They go back and say he's raised Lazarus from the dead, and they don't say no, he didn't. They say, firstly, oh dear, if he keeps doing this, everyone's going to start believing in him, which is funny reaction number one. And then funny reaction number two is he's raising people from the dead. Let's kill him. It's like, no,
Great plan.
That's not going to work. But the flip side of that, which I think is funny, and I talk about it in I've got a new book called The Gospel According to a Sitcom Writer. I sort of dig into how the Pharisees assumed they could kill Jesus, even though they knew he could raise people from the dead. Whereas Jesus was telling his disciples, I'm going to be betrayed and killed. And they don't know what he's talking about. And they're just like, what does he mean he's going to be killed? That doesn't make any sense. He can't. How could he be killed? And so when Jesus is killed, they're like, he's been killed. We didn't know anything about this. And when they go to visit his tomb, they take spices. You know, they're hiding. They're taking spices. They're not just going, oh, this is going to be amazing. He's going to come leaping out of the tomb any second now. No, they don't do that. They are astonished to find that Jesus. And then at that moment, they go, he did say, he did say he would be killed and rise. Yes, that's right, actually. Yes. Yeah. Right. There we go. And then he's back, and then he ascends into heaven. It's like, what, you know, they're kind of rolling with the punches. I mean, I feel sorry for them. They react just like we would have done. And I think that's what makes the gospel accounts so human. So if you read them in that way, rather than just imagining them as stained glass windows with big white dinner plates around their heads, I think it really does bring it alive.
Yeah, that's great. Well, on real life people, James, I mean, Christians themselves, you've kind of hinted at sometimes Christians haven't had the best sense of humor. You know, what, in your view, what should characterize Christians when it comes to comedy and laughter and all that?
I think
yeah.
I think we should be quick to laugh. I think we should be quick. It's a real shame. Obviously, I've written a show with Milton Jones. I wrote this radio show with him, and he's done quite a few Christian gigs, and he doesn't like doing them because Christian audiences aren't very good. They don't laugh very much. Quite often they check mentally that they can laugh at something before they laugh at it. Normal people don't do that. They just laugh. It's what C.S. Lewis calls surrendering to the art form. And so I think there's always this sort of, we have this strange view that if we've been in a room with a dirty joke or a joke that's wrong, we are somehow made unclean by it. It's like, no, that's not how it works. There's nothing, it's touching dead animals that makes you unclean, pre-crucifixion of Jesus. So we're okay now. And if we want to be countercultural, if we want to be Christ-like and hang out with the people who are not respectable, then they're going to talk in a certain way. They're going to make certain jokes that we're going to kind of not necessarily like. But we don't need to be prudish about language necessarily. We should speak in a way that honors Christ, but we don't have to be censorious and uptight about everything else. So I wrote this show set in the army, and I had to be truthful. Soldiers swear. I don't know if you knew that. There's an expression called swearing like a trooper. because when a bomb detonates, you don't say "oh dear." They use other words, and it would be very odd to have a TV show where they don't use any of those words. So so I think we just need to be a bit generous to the situation that we're in. Maybe so we don't have to laugh at everything. We don't need to make people feel better or necessarily, but I think we can kind of give people the benefit of the doubt, and especially in comedy. And Christians are now worrying about cancel culture, and that Christians they believe this, they say this, and they're being cancelled, they're being taken off Twitter, they're being fired from their jobs, all that kind of stuff. We kind of invented cancel culture. We used to do that to other people. We used to make people not go to films that we didn't like. We used to go around with placards campaigning against the life of Brian, campaigning against Jerry Springer the opera. So then they probably don't feel that sorry for us now that we're on the receiving end of it. So I think in a way we want to be maybe better company, maybe a bit more generous, and hospitable in that sense. We don't have to find everything funny. We don't have to laugh at everybody else's jokes necessarily, but I think there's a disposition and a demeanor that we could be a bit more Christ-like with.
Very helpful, thanks. And we'll have time
one other thing. Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
The other thing is, it's really struck me recently. I've started this YouTube channel show called The Sacred Art of Joking, partly based on the book. And I talk to people who find, I talk to them about a bit of the Bible that makes them laugh. And so I just spoke to comedian Paul Carenza. That one's up. And then the next one up is I'm talking to Jude Simpson, who's a poet and comedian. In fact, she's not far away from you in Cambridge, actually. Who we talked to. She finds the woman at the well funny in John 4. And in the course of this conversation, it was really interesting how you just note that Jesus messes with people. And so Jesus is having this lovely time with her, talking about living water, loads of references to Jacob and all that kind of stuff. And it looks like, blimey, is he going to kiss her at some point? Because that's what Jacob does when he's at the well in Genesis and all that kind of stuff. And then they're having this wonderful moment. And Jesus just says, hey, go and get your husband. And she's like, awkward. She's had 5 husbands, and the person she's now living with is not her husband. Now, there's loads of ways in which, like, she didn't get to divorce people because she's a woman, and actually maybe she's been on the receiving end of pretty bad stuff. But Jesus really ruins the moment, and he really is happy just to make people feel a bit uncomfortable. And so he does engage in some sort of almost banter with people. And he's prepared to kind of step out and make someone feel awkward. And he isn't just satirical against powerful people. He's also messing with a Samaritan woman. That's a really odd thing to do, isn't it? So I think he kind of risks. So maybe we're just, I've said that we're a bit uptight. Also, we're too nice. So maybe we sort of avoid confrontation. And actually, we can just sort of push back a bit and just sort of go, hang on, what was that? What do you mean by that? Okay, let's talk about that. And yeah, obviously, that's not for everyone. That's the kind of stuff that big mouths like me do. But I think that we can be a little bit more, again, Christ-like in the way that we talk. And he constantly throws people and messes with people, especially in John's Gospel. When you read it, he says things and people wander away from him just going, what is he talking about? Is he going to kill himself? What does that mean? Is he eating flesh? What is that? He knows that they're doing it. He's not trying to clarify. In the other Gospels, he tells parables and the crowd don't understand them. And he's fine with it. So I think sometimes we want to make everything clear, iron out everything, be serious, make sure, it's like, it's just not what we read. It's just not there in the Bible. That's not how the Gospels are put together. So I think that's another way in which we can be more Christ-like.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing that. James, I think we should look at our poll.
Okay.
I don't know if you have eyes on it, but I'll tell you the results are in. So the question was, what's your favorite style of comedy? Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll be glad sitcom is a runaway winner.
Great. I'm very pleased to hear that.
Yeah. Wow, no one voted slapstick. 0 votes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's kind of you do get sitcoms that have slapstick in them and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of fair enough.
Brilliant. Yeah. No pratfalls tonight.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have Q&A in just a bit, so keep the questions coming in. Just before that, we're going to watch a little video. I think one of the nice things, I don't know if you find this, James, we're kind of doing this now. One of the nice things about lockdown is you get to see inside someone's house, right? That you wouldn't normally get to see.
Yeah, my house is blue.
Yeah, what's going on there? But also with church, anyone who's watching who hasn't been to Christ Church in Cambridge, you can get a look inside, a sneak peek about what we've been up to over the last year or so in this video, and then we'll have Q&A. So back soon.
Well, good morning and a very, very warm welcome to what is the very first ever online service from Christ Church Cambridge.
Because of the coronavirus, we're not able to record this in our church building. But Christ Church is a church family, and because of that, there's going to be a variety of people doing things in our service. And as they do that, we're going to drop into different homes. Well, good morning and welcome to our service as we gather to worship. Those of us who are here, can we just give a wave to the camera? Oh, hello.
Warm welcome to 10:15 service this morning, back in the building.
Kids. That hope in God. It's also why we wanted to still allow a small gathering of people here.
Helen, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Well, good morning and welcome to Christ Church.
Tomorrow. And then
Drinking a coffee in my slippers this morning.
Probably that everything we have comes from God.
Brilliant. We're back for Q&A. James, are you there again?
I'm here, yeah.
Great. Well, James, we've got a few questions for the next 15 minutes or so. Here's a quick one to get us started. My 9-year-old son came up with a joke. What time did school finish by Wendy Bell Goes. What do you reckon? Any good?
Wow, yeah, that's when the bell goes. Very good. Yeah, that's good. That'll do. It's a good start.
Great, excellent. Here's another one. Religion tends to be the butt of many jokes in the media. Is there a right way of joking about religion?
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, it depends on the context. I mean, let's be honest. Christians have kind of had it their own way in the UK, in England, for, well, I don't know, a couple of thousand years. Maybe 1500 years. So, you know, we the reason is, you know, Christianity gets a hard time because it is the dominant religion. It doesn't seem like it if you are actually a Christian, but it doesn't feel like anyone's really hurt if Christianity is attacked or belittled in some way. But obviously it doesn't feel like that. So I think that's why it often feels like religion is the butt of many jokes, but also because it's always more interesting to, you know, to satirize. You know, you got to make comedy about something, and religion is one of the things that you can make comedy about. So it's just kind of out there, really. I guess it's fair game, and it always just seems a bit unfair to Christians that we seem to get singled out. But I don't think it maybe feels that way if you have another faith as well. I think you feel like you're under the cosh too. So, you know, but yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've answered that very well. I think it might come up again though in another question.
Great. Here's another then. Have you ever had to say no to writing for a show or a person because that show or person wasn't compatible with your beliefs, if you can say?
No, I don't think there's anything I can think of particularly. I think, yeah, there were one or two shows when I was writing. There was like one or two shows on BBC Three, which I remember thinking, oh, I could try and get involved in that. I just thought, tonally, that just doesn't feel like it's kind of my thing, really. So I don't particularly want to get involved in that. But in a way, it's just what I like doing is helping. When I'm script editing, I like helping somebody write a show that they want to write, and I want them to write the best show that they can. I want to be a blessing to them, even if I fundamentally don't agree with the premise. So through the BBC Writers' Room or whatever I do, there are people come up with various ideas for comedies, and they've written scripts, and I'm helping them. And it's promoting ideas that I don't necessarily agree with, but I know what they're trying to do. It's not for me to try to talk them out of saying this or doing that. But actually, what's interesting is when something is really preachy, be it just having a really obvious political or religious or social message, it usually gets quite boring. So actually, usually what you try to do is try to set up a discussion between two different characters. And that's why, I don't know if it's one of the questions, my favorite sitcom of all time, which I get asked quite a lot, is Yes, Prime Minister, which is Sir Humphrey and Hacker, the Prime Minister, having an argument every week. And it's about they call it the political will and the administrative won't. And who do you agree with? Well, I've always instinctively been on Hacker's side, but I got into it watching it with a mate, and he was always on Sir Humphrey's side. Mm-hmm. But the point is, both of them kind of slightly overplay their hand, as it were, and the truth is sort of somewhere in between. So I think that's kind of where comedy does well. Is it's not actually a sitcom. Actually, is not espousing any particular point of view normally. I mean, there are some that, for example, Will and Grace, a show about same-sex couples in America, that really did shift the needle to making that lifestyle much more culturally acceptable. But those shows are fairly rare and don't come up that often. But most shows tend to be about the tension between worldviews and ideas and debates and all that kind of stuff. And in every sitcom, there's usually a moral dimension to it. Which is why I often argue that situation comedy is the most Christian form of entertainment that there is, for reasons that I could also go into if another question comes onto that.
Interesting, great. Well, let's have another then. Thanks, James. A couple of things just about pandemic life. So where are we? There's a couple. What have been the pros and cons of the pandemic on the supply and demand of your work? Another one, will you maybe use unique lockdown material to inspire any comedy stuff in the future? Anything around there?
The second one first is there's a TV show called Staged, which is about which is basically lockdown, and they've basically nailed that area. It was Michael Sheen and David Tennant, which was funny. The first series was very funny. The second series was weird, actually. I didn't think it didn't quite hang together for me. So I think that once we are over this, and I think it is still going to take a while, isn't it? I don't think we'll particularly want to be reminded of it. But obviously, there are various ways in which we do work now. I don't think we're ever quite going to go back to how things were. So, I do this sort of thing a bit now. Churches didn't used to do this sort of thing, and I didn't either. And I think they will continue to do this sort of thing a bit, even though meeting in person is always preferable for church gatherings and that kind of stuff. It's an embodied community, isn't it? It's not a virtual community. You can't be a Christian just online. We need to gather around the Lord's table. We need to hear God's word together. We need to hold each other to account. We need to look each other in the eye. We need to, the one anothering stuff that people talk about. In terms of work, I'm just trying to remember. It seems such a long time ago. One or two things did probably disappear. But then actually, because of lockdown, I was able to attend a meeting online that I couldn't have attended previously. And as a result of attending that meeting, I ended up writing an episode of Shakespeare and Hathaway, which is a daytime detective show. And it would have been filmed in August last year, but it didn't for whatever reason. And now is going to be filmed this year. So I ended up writing a detective thing. murder mystery.
And is that a comedy or just a straight murder mystery?
Well, say again?
Is that comedy or just a straight murder
Yeah,
mystery?
it's very much a comedy kind of show. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write for it. The two main actors in it are very good comedy actors. And I've actually worked with one of them before on radio, Joe Joyner, who used to be in EastEnders for quite a while back. And Mark Benton, I just think they're both really funny. So it was a nice change to be able to do that. And it was weird, really, because I was so worried about the murder mystery plot and getting all that absolutely right. And I kept being told, just make it simpler. No, it's fine. Just have them talk. You're funny. You're a funny writer. Just stop worrying about it. So I was I was worried about all the stuff that I don't normally do, which is the mystery and the mechanics of all that stuff. But then that's also then made me think I'm going to write my own sort of mystery thing. And based on the two characters in the God Particle, I've sort of taken them and put them in a context where it's not a murder mystery, but it's a mystery. And so I've sort of ended up going in that direction as well. Because I think sitcoms are getting very authored and very, I think they're becoming less mainstream. And I think that's a shame because I really like mainstream comedy that you can watch with your mum or your sister or your gran or your kids. But I think murder mysteries and stuff like that, I think they're making loads of them. And I kind of enjoy that because it goes back to we have an inherent desire for justice. And therefore, if there's a murder mystery, who done it? We find out who done it and they are brought to justice. And that makes us feel good because the universe is just because God is just. If God weren't just, then detective movies wouldn't make any sense at all because that's not how life is it? If your car is stolen, they're never going to find who stole your car. If your house is broken into and you then get a letter saying, oh, we caught them and they got sentenced to 3 years, you would be astonished. But within this compressed reality of either sitcom or murder mystery or whatever, the rules of the universe work perfectly and we want them to. And that's because we are image bearers of God. And that's why I say that sitcom is Christian, and not least because my writing partner says how that sitcom is the most honest form. He's not a believer. He's not a Christian. He says that sitcom is the most honest form of entertainment because people don't change. In a sitcom, the same people make the same mistakes day after day, week after week. And in our own lives, we know that that's true. We sort of had the conversation and we sort of come away from a conversation with someone just going, we've just had the same conversation again. And you look at your phone and you see who's ringing you and you just think, I literally know what they're going to say to me. And then you answer the phone and then they say it. We actually
live. Vice versa, right?
Yeah, we actually live in a sitcom. We all live in our own sitcom where people sort of don't change. And the only way out of that is the power of the Holy Spirit to change hearts. And even that work he tends to do fairly slowly. So people tend not to change particularly fast. But anyway, that's why sitcom is for me such an appealing genre.
Oh wow, I'd love to dig into that more. I'm excited for that mystery. Someone here has posted the God Particle play is great. So a recommendation for that. And someone appreciates it. In fact, 3 people have voted for that.
There we go. Not an outlier.
There you go. What else do we have? Keep questions coming in, by the way. Some questions, James, kind of around have you met other Christians in the comedy world? I guess you mentioned Milton Jones. Also, how do you stand out as a Christian? What do you do differently?
It's a good question. I think actually for me, one of the main I think when Christians know there are Christians in the media, instinctively they're sort of hoping that they will make more Christian content on TV, and that's complete. I understand that, but it's frequently not possible because the people who make decisions on what is commissioned rather assume that people aren't interested in Christian things, and I think that's obviously fundamentally wrong, but I can't do anything about that. But actually, I think the witness of people within the industry is really important. And I think, therefore, the way we behave is really important. The way I try to talk to people, the way I try to be good company, the way I try to be generous in people's assumptions, try not to get angry, You know, so I think it's just in those day-to-day things where it's no different to any other job in that sense. Is you want to be salt and light. You know, you want to be kind to people. You want to be generous to people. And that does stick out in the media because it tends to be fairly fast moving. People tend to have quite strong opinions, but that's okay because I've got strong opinions, and I don't mind having the discussion about it as well. So, yeah, I think it's just trying to make sure that you don't end up doing the things that everybody else is doing, and that's no different to any other workplace. You don't want to gossip. You want to be. Yeah, that's one thing in particular. I think gossip is a really easy thing to do, and I try to sort of. Whenever somebody's being talked about, you tend to sort of say, you know, even if you don't like their work particularly, it doesn't make you laugh. You just think, oh, you know, don't know if you saw so-and-so's show. I didn't really like it, which is a shame because I actually think he's great. I really like him. And I like that other thing that he did, rather than everyone just jumping in and just saying, oh, did you see it? Oh, my goodness, it was awful, wasn't it? So, I mean, comedy writers are the worst for that. So yeah, it's just things you say, the things you do in that space. And obviously that's the downside of lockdown, is that you're not meeting people as much as you can. And therefore, you know, that you have the meeting, you talk about the thing, the meeting's over and that's it. There's very little of that stuff in between. So although I love being at home, and I'd like to travel less for work and have fewer meetings and do more on Zoom, I don't think we can replace it. And I don't think that's healthy from a Christian kingdom perspective either.
Yeah, James, maybe a couple of last quick ones to squeeze in. Any subject matter, any subjects for comedy that you would consider off limits? No.
Nothing. No, and I think I've been particularly. I mean, in the book, I talk about how the Holocaust doesn't sound very funny, and yet there's a movie called Life is Beautiful, which won Oscars. Robert Benigni won Best Actor, and it's half set in a concentration camp, and it's about a father and his son trying to survive that by making it into a game. And I know there are people who found that deeply troubling and offensive, but it was a good movie and it works. And some people who maybe went through that experience would say that they couldn't watch it. The irony is, Mel Brooks, who wrote The Producers, doesn't like Life is Beautiful and thinks that the Gentile who made it has no right to make a movie like that. So the king of bad taste himself, who wrote Springtime for Hitler in The Producers, is accusing other people of bad taste, you know. So, you know, I realize this is a complicated area, but I think the movie is defensible. And there are other things that I've seen very skillful comedians do that I just thought, oh, I didn't think you could ever joke about that. And they do. And I just thought, oh, that's very good. I wouldn't do that joke. I think that joke is morally defensible. I think it wouldn't be doable in many contexts. I think in a comedy club where everyone's paid 15 quid to be there and we all know the rules, I think is a context where some of these things can be said. And if you're offended by them, well, that's okay. It's good. It's good to be offended. It shows that you still have some kind of, if you're not offended by anything, it's like heat, isn't it? Things need to burn you because they're hurting you. If nothing burns you, that's a real problem. So if you're offended by stuff, well, that's good. It shows your senses are working. It shows that you're paying attention. But again, just because you're offended by it, it doesn't mean that it can't be said, shouldn't be said. And at the end of the day, comedians and performers have to make up their own minds what they're prepared to say and what they're not prepared to say, and live with the consequences of that. And I think we can, as long as people do that with their eyes open, I'm fine with it.
Wonderful. Well, James, I'd love to ask you more. There are more questions, but we're out of time, and I don't want to keep you. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a delight, and thanks to everyone for joining from home. Thanks for watching. James, any last words from you?
Yeah, if you want to know more, I do a weekly Substack article which you can find jamescary.substack.com. But it's probably just easy if you go to jamescary.co.uk, Cary spelled C-A-R-Y as in Cary Grant. Then you'll find stuff. And my new book is called The Gospel According to a Sitcom Writer, which is kind of meant to be a funny book, looking at those funny bits in the New Testament. And The Sacred Art of Joking is about how jokes work and how they go wrong and all that kind of stuff as well. So go to jamescary.co.uk and click around, and you'll find what you need.
Wonderful. James, I'd love to be able to say that I've made a sitcom writer laugh at a joke. So can I try a joke on you? You don't have to laugh.
Good luck. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Europe.
Europe who? Oh, very good.
Yeah.
I'm a comedy writer, so we don't laugh. We just go, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I'll take that. that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Well, thanks for joining, and everyone.
I can't believe you told that joke. So inappropriate. Honestly, your church will be very disappointed in you. Some people are offended by that, and I hope you can live with the consequences.
Well, let's hope
we
so.
all now have the equipment to do that. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for joining. Thanks everyone for joining from home. If you'd like to, feel free to get in touch with us at Christchurch. Some links are just about to come up, and you can get in touch with us via those. But thanks for joining, and hope you have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.